All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review and the continuation of our BCBA task list series with G6 instructions and rules. When we think about instructions, we typically think about SDs and trying to evoke certain behaviors. Instructions are also known for clarifying or specifying the reinforcement schedule, whereas rules are kind of a subset of instructions where they're a type of verbal contingency. So we're going to go through that. It's a little confusing, but as always, we're going to boil it down to the simplest aspects. We're going to keep it simple and we're going to focus on what we need to know for the exam. As always, check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. Subscribe for all of our updates. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. So, instructions and rules. Let's start with instructions because rules are kind of a subset of instructions. When we think about instructions, we are talking about rules, directions, signs, where we're getting people and learners to do things, right? So think about prompts, think about contingencies, think about communicating reinforcement schedules. Oftentimes, we do use instructions to communicate the reinforcement schedule. There's sometimes this idea that we should keep reinforcement schedules hidden or contingencies hidden, and it's just not the case. When in reality, if we communicate to the participant or the learner exactly what we need them to do, oftentimes it's much more effective. Think about if you have a learner who doesn't like to work. If you tell them you just need to complete 3 problems and you're done, that's a lot better than letting them sit there and work on problems and then telling them they're done without expectations. So, instructions are very good at giving a participant an idea of about what is required for me to get this reinforcement. So, you must answer 5 questions correctly to win $10. I will ignore any question until the timer goes off. 2 great examples of instructions, directions, signs, rules about how they might receive reinforcement. And if you see, for instance, this one, it looks very similar to a rule because it is very similar, right? Remember, rules are a subset of instructions. And so I think G6 confuses people not because of the concept and how complicated or not complicated it is, but this idea of what's the difference between an instruction and a rule. Well, just think about a rule as a subset of instructions. The instructions are the umbrella, and then rules, directions, and signs all live under that umbrella. Another way to think about instructions is through a prompt. So when we use verbal prompts, right, we can describe the contingency. So let's say the learner says 2 plus 2 equals, and then we say the answer is 4. Here is our verbal prompt. It's also the instruction, right? It's a response prompt to evoke the answer is 4. Now, getting into rule governed behavior, which really is what is much more commonly discussed. Okay. Again, when we talk about instructions, we're not trying to overcomplicate it. We're typically just talking about specifying what we want somebody to do, specifying a reinforcement system, trying to evoke a behavior through maybe a prompt. So instructions, don't overcomplicate that. We often speak about rule governed behavior a lot more frequently. And that's because rule governed behavior is also known as instructional control. And this is what we're trying to gain over clients, right? You want instructional control. When you have instructional control, you can start to get the learners to do what you want with just verbal stimuli. And that's a great place to get. So, rules, which are verbal stimuli, evoke behavior, alter MOs, or label the consequences of behavior. So, you can see rules do a lot of different things. Keep in mind, again, rules live under that umbrella of instruction, right? So when we talk about evoking behavior by giving instructions, a lot of times we're just giving rules. So look both ways before crossing the street to avoid cars. This is a rule, right? 99% of people, right, don't get hit by cars when they cross the street, and yet they still look both ways. Why? Well, because of the rule. And so that's the main idea behind rules. No immediate consequence for the behavior is apparent. When we have contingency shaped behavior, that behavior immediately comes into contact with the contingency or consequence. I tell you don't look, I tell you to look both ways before crossing the street to avoid cars. It's not like you're going to get hit by a car necessarily if you don't. And it's also not like if you look both ways, you will avoid the car. It's that is the rule where you're not always going to get that contingency. Okay. So if we're trying to avoid getting hit by a car, we never have to get hit by a car in our life to still follow this rule. So no immediate consequence might be available, especially if a car isn't coming, but we still are going to do it to avoid those cars. The response consequence delay is greater than 30 seconds. So again, really emphasizing the time between doing the behavior and the consequence is long because when we talk about rule governed behavior, it's not necessarily maintained by the consequence and contacting that contingency. It's maintained by that verbal instruction or stimuli. Behavior changes without reinforcement. So we don't even need the consequence necessarily, right? We have instructional control. We're setting these rules, we're following the rules. There's a large increase in the occurrence of a behavior after one instance of reinforcement. So let's say reinforcement does happen following a rule, a dramatic shift in behavior occurs, right? That's the power of rules. And then no consequence for the behavior even exists. Boil these down, right, to the contingency in contacting that consequence isn't necessarily controlling the behavior with rule governed behavior. That's why instructional control is so powerful because when you are in a, let's say, a clinical setting or in a home setting, you can tell the client what to do, or you can make a rule and they're going to follow that rule even if they don't contact a consequence. Let's say, for instance, your client's parents are painting the house, and you tell the client when you get there, you can't touch the walls today, or else you'll get paint in your hands and your mom will get mad. Well, we don't have to go through the whole process of the client touching the paint and then the mom getting mad. If you have instructional control, that should be enough to where the client avoids touching the wall altogether. And that's the power of rule governed behavior. We don't even need a consequence sometimes to exist. The verbal stimuli is enough. And then finally, let's talk quickly about self rules. Self rules can be very complex because they start to involve relationships and private events. So when we think about self rules, we're describing hypothetical outcomes that could occur at any place or any time. And two of the most prevalent, common ones, especially in kids and as kids become adults, is I am terrible at math or I am terrible at reading. These are self rules describing what might happen if you try to do math or you try to read. If you're always saying, I am terrible at reading, you're describing a hypothetical outcome based on prior experiences. So let's say you read a book in class and you stumbled over some words. Now you're saying, well, I'm just terrible at reading based on that one experience. In the future, this is an issue if public behaviors controlled by your rules, like I am terrible at reading, interfere with other behaviors. If you start to avoid reading altogether because of your self rule that you're terrible at reading, that's a big issue. And so typically, self rules are reinforced by negative reinforcement because you can avoid situations or escape situations based on your self rule. So if you engage in avoidance behavior related to reading due to the rule, well, obviously that is an issue. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Subscribe for all of our BCBA updates. As always, work hard, study hard. We'll see you soon.